Now I know what you're thinking. 2 videos in a month? Who am I? What's going on, everybody? I'm rested, energized, relaxed, all that good stuff, and I'm here today to bring you a look at a game that's near and dear to my heart personally. I'm more than happy to do it at this point. I was starting to feel like 2/3 of the last reviews I did were starting to give me heartburn. Whatever. We're moving on from that. Today, hype is building for the Xbox Series X and the PS5, which are both less than 2 months away from coming out. And it's always a good time for me because when the build-up happens, I start to reflect on where we came from as gamers as a whole. And that probably sounds weird to some people. I don't know. You be the judge of that. But I'm in my mid to late 20s, and I came from the early 90s where I got to experience everything from the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis to stuff like the PS1 and Dreamcast. And while I never owned all of those systems myself, we didn't exactly come from money. I had plenty of family and friends who had them, so naturally, up to a certain point, I had a lot of experience around the table. Then came Christmas in 2001, when I was 9 years old, and we actually got a PS2. And man, that shit opened up my world when it came to gaming. And like I said, I was 9 years old, and now I feel really old for saying it, but yeah, it was a good time for everybody. But when I originally got the system, it didn't come with anything to play that Christmas, so my dad had borrowed a game called Tokyo Extreme Racer Zero, which gave us a good amount of fun. But I wasn't, and still am not, the biggest racing game fan, so I was wishing for something new when my cousin came through like a damn gaming savior and lent me a little known game called Onimusha Warlords. At the time, this was a new face on the scene, but we know today that this went on to become Capcom's 6th best-selling franchise. However, despite how successful it was, we haven't gotten a new game in the series since the end of the PS2 era. So the series left us high and dry with 4 main games and 2 spin-offs that, yeah, I don't have any experience with these, so we're just gonna leave these out for now. And when the whole trend of classic game trilogy collections started booming midway of the PS3 era, my brother and I had been saying for years up to this day that they needed to bring these games back. Then came 2018 when we had all but given up hope when, BAM! They announced an HD port of Onimusha 1, but only the first game. Capcom, what are you doing to me? At least I still have the other 2 games in the original trilogy right here. And maybe if I can ever get the equipment to do it properly, I'll cover these games at a later date. No promises though. Anywho, come January 2019, almost 18 years to the day since the original PS2 release, sure enough, Onimusha Warlords HD launched on PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. Naturally, I've already played the hell out of this game back in the early 2000s and since its re-release. And I've come across many people who still don't know about the series when I bring it up, so I thought to myself, maybe I could switch it up and do a kind of retrospective review. So today, I bring you just that, a review of Onimusha Warlords HD on PS4. Onimusha takes place in feudal Japan, and that's really all you'll get for setup here because the game immediately says screw setup and goes straight into an all-out war cutscene, which for the time was really impressive looking. The enemy side on this battle is controlled by Nobunaga Oda. You know, that guy who's always the villain when any game happens in feudal Japan. Enter Samanosuke Akechi, the protag of this story, who just proceeds to stomp all over the soldiers that try fighting him up on this hilltop. Meanwhile, Nobunaga starts celebrating his supposed victory in this battle when all of a sudden... So that takes care of that when the scene shifts to this woman writing a letter before Samanosuke enters to find that she's been taken. This woman turns out to be Princess Yuki, the cousin of Samanosuke, who turns out was writing the letter for him. She was basically sending an SOS to him because she noticed strange things happening at her castle and was sending for Samanosuke to save her. But he got there too late, leaving Samanosuke and his ninja partner Kaede to stew over the crime scene, promising to rescue the princess. It actually doesn't take long at all for Samanosuke to find her, being towed along by some strange dudes. You fight them off, and you don't even get a full minute to celebrate the reunion before this giant-ass demon shows up and yeets Samanosuke, stealing back the princess. The KO'd samurai awakes to find himself in some sort of dream realm where he finds himself in the presence of a clan of ogre spirits who had been sealed away by the very clan of demons who stole the princess. They proceed to bestow their power onto Samanosuke in the form of a magic gauntlet complete with a functioning blinking eyeball and send him on his way, asking him to destroy the demons in their place. And Samanosuke vows to do just that while he's saving the princess. It's here where the game starts to really open up, because where not 2 minutes ago before this, you couldn't even manage a good hit on the big demon, let alone decisive strikes on the smaller ones. But now, you start slicing through these boys like butter, and you end up tracking down the big boy who kidnapped the princess. Where before you couldn't even do anything to him, you end up using your new power to take him down with ease. In the next area, you meet a demon scientist who says that he hasn't seen anybody as bold as you since Nobunaga. Understandably curious, he explains to you that the demons had resurrected Nobunaga, and he pledged his allegiance in return before sicking his new experiment on you and leaving. You defeat it, find new magic power, and make your way all the way to Inabayama Keep, where the demons have taken over and stored Princess Yuki. Here, you run into a short, ratty-looking samurai assaulting a young boy and intervene. This short samurai dude identifies himself as Tokichiro Kinoshita, a servant of Nobunaga's clan, who offers you to join him, only to get quickly denied. He leaves, giggling and saying that you'll meet again. Right after this, you run into the boy again, and he gives you his name, Yumemaru, before he takes off again after you start asking what he's even doing in a place like this. Samanosuke instructs Kaede to go after him. Shortly after that, Kaede returns to you, without Yumemaru mind you, to hit you with more exposition. Turns out Princess Yuki took this kid in when he had nowhere to go, so he's like a little brother to her, and he came here to try and save her. I would have called this kid brave if it still weren't a dumb move for him to show up at a demon-infested castle without weapons, but A for effort, I guess. Good job, kid. Immediately after this, you end up having to navigate a series of traps throughout the castle where you alternate between the two characters before Samanosuke gets stuck in this water trap. Anybody who knows this part knows this is the hardest puzzle in the entire game, but I'll get to that later. Get past this, and you come up on Yumemaru getting kidnapped again, with Rat Boy showing up and offering you to join him again. He also explains that the demon's plan is to sacrifice Princess Yuki via a ritual that involves filling her skull with her own blood and having Nobunaga drink it, granting him untold power. He leaves, and you go on the search for Yumemaru, leading you to the roof where you fight this big dude and earning another new magic power upon his defeat before saving Yumemaru. Once Samanosuke brings him to safety, he begins to explain the circumstances of Yuki's life and why she's so kind to other people, followed by tales of how he's traveled the world after being pressured into it by his uncle. He's seen so many different things in people that he believes there's so much out there that the constant warring in Japan seems trivial, and he imparts all of this knowledge onto Yumemaru. Good guy Samanosuke over here teaching the kids not to hate people for being different as shit. I like that. Just then, some lady named Nui busts in and tells them that the princess is underground before passing out. So naturally, without question any of the info you were just given, you proceed underground just to find out it's a trap! And Ratman over here traps you underground while a Samanosuke double shows up and knocks out Kaede while he and Nui snatch Yumemaru again. The next section sees you take control of Kaede when a dying soldier tells her that monsters are coming from the West Prison. So you go through a whole gameplay section with her with the objective of investigating the prison. Let me just say that I think it's cool that you can control another character in this game, but I really hate Kaede's sections. She's not very strong, and any upgrades done to Samanosuke don't transfer over to these sections, so she essentially has base stats for her sections. And she can't even do the game's trademark soul absorbing technique, which I'll explain later. So there's literally no point in fighting the demons with her, so my first instinct when they make me play her is... You get through the prison to find Princess Yuki trapped in the prison and promise to get her out when the demon scientist shows up and snatches her away, leaving Kaede to fight another new demon. When you beat it, everything switches back to Samanosuke, who's just waking up from his little nap. Right away, he runs into the doppelganger and you have to duel him. Defeat him, then you continue on after finding this key to the door that was previously locked in the middle hallway, where you find Nui holding Yumemaru, and then... At the same time that nightmare fuel was happening, a great big door shaves off half of the castle and you learn that this is a portal to the demon realm, and that the dark ceremony is going to begin soon. She retreats with Yumemaru into the portal, and a great big lock blocks the door with some serious wind pressure. From here, a good chunk of the rest of the game centers around you exploring the rest of the castle to find a way to break that wind device. Eventually, Samanosuke finds the Great Bow before the room he found it in locks itself, leaving him with a room full of demon ants. Switch to Kaede, where her journey leads her to finding the Great Arrow, and soon after ending up outside the building that Samanosuke is locked in. Here, that big mantis lady from before shows up again and tells you that the ceremony will soon be complete, and that consists of them killing Yumimaru to make Princess Yuki hit the apex of her sorrow, which would then make her blood more potent to feed it to Nobunaga and make him gain more power. Fucking creepy. Take her down, and Kaede lights some gunpowder to send the building up in flames, knocking you guys into the nearby river. When you wash ashore, Samanosuke takes Kaede and puts her in the safe room, ready for the final leg of this journey. He takes the great bow and arrow combo, destroys the lock, and enters the demon realm. He gets cut off at the gate by the demon scientist, who gets offended when Samanosuke tells him to go back and play with his worthless toys. For your insult, he summons Marcellus, his greatest demon yet, which is basically the guy you fought on the castle roof, but on roids. Beat him, make your way into the depths of the palace, and you find the princess and Yumimaru strapped to the wall. And before you can even make a move for them, you're greeted by booming ominous laughter which belongs to Fortinbras, the king of the demons.
I am Fortinbras.
He makes his grand entrance, beckons for Nobunaga to come start the ceremony, and proceeds to fight you. It's a pretty intense fight the first time around, testing your skills and whatnot. You need to make good use of some of the controls I'll be explaining soon to avoid his attacks, but you eventually prevail, and Kaede enters at the last second to help you cut the two captives free, only for Fortinbras to awaken once more and catch Samanosuke in a death grip. He yells for the others to escape before he hits one final death throw when... This moment was always so badass to me, and back when I originally played this, I wished I could do this in the game so much, but alas, you're only given moments to enjoy him wrecking Fortinbras before the fight's over and he changes back to normal. He wakes up to see the reflection of Nobunaga and the Demon King's now dead eyes, and the two exchange glares while the palace crumbles around them. From here, a pretty somber epilogue plays out, explaining the aftermath of the battles that led to Nobunaga's death, and how other key players met their ends and whatnot, which I honestly totally forget about every time because who was paying attention to any of that the whole time? That aside, you're told that Princess Yuki gets the freedom she never had after moving in with another family member, only to leave about a month later to see the world. Yumimaru decides to go with her after hearing Samanosuke's tales of the outside world. Kaede, meanwhile, goes into the service of Samanosuke's uncle, Mitsuhide Akechi, where she dies on the battlefield years later. And Samanosuke was never seen again. The end. You know, looking back and for the first time critically at this game, I could say I still enjoyed this game's story way more than the other games I've covered at this point, in fact. But being realistic, there's parts of it that are just dumb or inconsequential in the grand scheme. Like, I get the whole war setting was the setup for Nobunaga's death in the story, but there's no setup or build up to that confrontation, and it's never brought up again until the end of the game, where it really comes off as an afterthought to the entire plot. Feels like a big old switcheroo to get you thinking you were about to get into something more realistic, and then bam, demons and magic, baby. Bet you weren't expecting this when you picked up the game. Also, I had to actually go out of my way to remember the names of certain characters like Ratman or the maid who ended up snatching Yumimaru, but I bet you if you started a drinking game for the amount of times someone calls Samanosuke by name that you would fucking die.
Dear Samanosuke. Samanosuke.
Samanosuke.
Can you be Samanosuke Akechi? Tell me, Samanosuke.
Samanosuke, is there something you wanted to ask this young man? Samanosuke! Samanosuke.
We get that he's the main character, but the only other name in the game that's given that much importance was Nobunaga, and you don't even see that guy after he gets skewered by an arrow until the end of the game, and for all of 10 seconds, and he doesn't even speak. I love Onimusha as a series, but these are things I have to be objective about giving a finer eye to it, and parts of it feel jank, or like excuses to put people in your way in order to progress. Don't even get me started on the demon names, because some of these I only learned after all these years because their names are attached to the trophies you get for beating them on your first playthrough. And I still, for the life of me, don't see this big goof having a name like Osric, but still, these are minor things. The story was serviceable, there were epic moments throughout, and if you know what you're doing, you can beat this whole game in a window of 1.5 to 3 hours. It's really not all that lengthy or complicated if you have half an idea what you're doing. It gets the job done. Now, my favorite part of this entire game, of course, is the gameplay. because this game wouldn't have half the nostalgia it does for me if it wasn't at least fun to play. It's basically like if you took OG Resident Evil in one hand, Samurais in the other, and then you said, now kiss, and then you eventually made this game as a baby. You have old school RE tank controls for movement, and just about every button on the controller is given a dedicated focus. You have normal attacks, magic attacks, a standard lock-on button, and a block. The other main mechanic is the game's main gimmick, absorbing. See, once you're given the magic gauntlet from the Ogre clan, you gain the ability to absorb the souls of slain enemies. They come in 3 types. Red is experience, blue restores magic power, and yellow is health. When you kill an enemy, they start floating around and you have to draw them in by holding the gauntlet button. But you have to be careful because you can be interrupted during this animation and enemies will not hesitate to do it. The souls also disappear after a while, so timing can be key in group fights. Take your stored red souls and upgrade your weapons and magic at magic mirrors, which are the save points in the game. Every weapon and the corresponding magic orb can be leveled up from level 1 to level 3. And you get 3 different magic weapons: a lightning nodachi, a fire greatsword, and a wind double-bladed naginata. Each are useful in different situations, what with having all unique attack animations and different attack speeds, while devastating magic attacks come along to boot. The lightning sword hits enemies with a flurries of blows before ending in a lightning bolt coming down. The flame weapon hits enemies with a trail of fire that knocks them over, and the wind weapon calls out a freaking tornado. All of these get bigger, badder, and more devastating the more you upgrade the magic orbs that go along with the weapons, and the weapons themselves get larger, stronger, and more deadly looking with their upgrades. You gain all of these pretty early, by the end of the second boss in fact, and then you're free to upgrade and use them as you see fit. You also score a bow and a gun later on that both pack some pretty above average damage, but I only ever save these for archer enemies or the Mantis boss since her cheap ass loves flying really high up and dive bombing for big damage. You also get fire arrows and burst bullets later, and those are even better. You can even spend red souls to upgrade regular ammo into these better forms of ammo, but you don't need to waste your time on these actually unless you're just wasting your ammo. Regardless of the weapon's power, you also have the ability to pull off what's known as an Isen counter, which is pretty much my favorite move in the whole game. You have 2 ways to pull this off, either with extremely precise timing of your sword swings, or with a well-timed block followed up with an attack. And let's just say the results are satisfying, to say the least. One thing to note is that you'll come across these plasma orbs holding doors closed, which react to a certain weapon depending on the color, and depending on the number of orbs ranging from 1 to 3, because of course they do, it's up to you to handle your upgrades smartly, because if you don't, then you'll end up barred from progressing and need to grind in order to upgrade to the necessary level to proceed. You also come across a number of puzzles in this game, which, since I made the Resident Evil comparison, is standard fare across the entire series. You have these number jumble boxes, and you also have these decoder boxes which require referencing these books with passages accompanied by symbols that you use to figure out the answer to the riddle that is engraved into each box. But none of these puzzles, none of them, compared to the damn water trap I mentioned when I talked about the story. You have to slide these panels to make the gold crest overlap with the marking on the panel, and this is by far the most difficult puzzle in the game, strictly because it comes with a time limit. If you get stuck, you're boned. But I've played this game so much let me just show you.
One eternity later.
But the combat can be very fast paced, and it all depends on your reactions and combat sense to get through a lot of these fights, because they love to just salt-based sprinkle enemies all over the place. And quite often you'll encounter lesser demons accompanied by heavier demons to make things more fun. There's even a moment where they throw this at you. The other big challenge is the Dark Realm. You see, after you get through the second half of the game, you come across this guy, and he offers to take you to the Dark Realm, a survival area where if you can survive all 20 floors, you find the Bishamon Ocarina. This is an entirely optional thing to do, but if you get it, then right before the final fight, you play it at the final magic mirror to unlock a sealed room where you obtain the Bishamon sword. This is the game's ultimate sword, which according to the game is so powerful it had to be sealed away. But even coming in at the end of the game, it's worth it because it has infinite magic and straight melts lower demons, and it also makes the Fortinbras fight a breeze. Trust that if you get this bad boy, you're in for a treat. Another thing to find is this game's fluorite rocks. There's 20 of them in the entire game, and some of them are in Kaede's sections, so they're missable because you can't replay her sections when you finish. Find an item halfway through that lets you see them, but by then, if you're doing it right, you'll have more than half. But if you find all of them and complete the game, you unlock Oni spirits when you complete it. It's a simple but challenging minigame that I don't feel like recording, but completing it unlocks the game's ultimate difficulty, which sounds like it's a hard mode, but they start you off with the freaking Bishamon sword from the jump, and you'll never need anything else because it's broken and it unlocks all the doors no matter the level. This makes it possible to snag the game's coveted S rank, which after everything else you did gives you these.
This way, sir.
Honestly, it's kind of funny at first, but also a little underwhelming, I want to say. But as I said, you'll have done everything else by this point, so I don't know what else we were supposed to expect. I've said everything about gameplay that I can, so let's move on to the game's presentation. Bearing in mind that this is a launch PS2 game, it still holds up kind of well. For the most part, this game kind of went with the Final Fantasy VII approach back in the day and juxtaposed in-game engine models against pre-rendered backgrounds. So a lot of stuff holds up pretty well as it hasn't really aged. But then you start noticing parts of the environment that are actually in-engine and they start to kind of clash with everything else in the environment. The CG movies in this game were all technically impressive for the time, and while close-up they're kind of weird, it still has the charm and the epic scale from the old days. What doesn't have that charm though is the voice acting, because boy, there are some gems here.
Men, fight and die with honor!
In this world, only the strong survive.
Samanosuke.
Let me tell you about the ways of the world, Yamamaru.
The world? Samanosuke. It's really you. Oh, I knew that you would come to save me.
This was probably one of the first times after I did my first playthrough where I went full weeb and turned on the subs, because let's be real, this was 2001. Voice acting in video games, especially Japanese games, took a few years into the PS2's lifespan to get good. And yes, I'm looking at you, Capcom.
What am I fighting for?
But I can sort of give it a pass because at this point it's in that so bad it's funny kind of category. Overall, you can see where things would need to improve if you ever pull this series from that dark, dank Capcom dungeon where they keep their unloved IPs to make a sequel for a reboot or remake or whatever. But if you can look past the parts of this game that may not have aged so gracefully, you still find yourself with an incredibly fun to play adventure that I personally, over almost 2 decades later, have probably played far too much considering all the stuff I have. This is one of those games that I never ever get tired of playing, and if the time I spent talking about it wasn't clear, this is one of my all-time favorites in my PS2 library. Now, if we could only get the other 2 games in this trilogy ported, Capcom, wink wink, it may be a cop-out, but I still love this game just like I did back in the day, and I can't wait to see what happens if we get more experiences like this in the next generation. So I humbly pass Onimusha Warlords a gold medal. Onimusha HD is a game that, regardless of its age, has seen a pretty successful trip into the modern age at this point. It's definitely dated, but the foundations were solid enough that it largely stands the test of time despite 1 or 2 poor attempts at modernizing the control scheme, and the not so glorious smoothing over of the models. As an entire game though, there are few that I've ever replayed so feverishly due to the nature of its quality, and that's really all I have to say about that. If you made it to the end and you're still watching, then I super appreciate you. I had a lot more energy going into this one because this is my first review after I closed the book on the Gundam Breaker saga over here, so I was definitely interested in trying to get my hands on something new for the channel. As I've stated before, while you guys are waiting in between videos, if you're interested, you can come check me out on my Twitch channel. The Road to Dragon Marathon is still going strong, and we're currently going through Yakuza 3. So if you want, I'll leave a link in the description. You can always check me out on there. As I stated before, the point of this marathon is to get through all the numbered games in the Yakuza series from Sega so that I can build up my personal hype for Yakuza Like a Dragon when it drops on November 13th, which I also just realized is the same week that the PS5 comes out, so I wonder how that's gonna go. But I'm going to leave that here for you guys, and if you like what you saw, then, you know, sound off in the comments below, let me know what you thought, and I'll leave you guys with it while I figure out what I'm going to do in the meantime for the next video. But thank you guys for watching, and have a great night. I'll see you later.